Right now, somewhere near you, someone is quietly getting richer, not because they won the lottery, not because they inherited money, because of 5 small habits they never post about, never brag about, and honestly never even think to mention because to them it just feels normal. That is the strange part. The habits that build real wealth are almost never the ones people talk about online. Nobody films themselves doing them. There's no dramatic before and after. Just quiet, boring repetition that eventually adds up to a completely different life. Let me tell you about Daniel. Daniel's 29, and for most of his 20s, he was broke in the specific way that looks fine from the outside. Decent job, decent apartment, decent car payment. He was not struggling. He was just stuck treading water, watching other people seem to move ahead while he stayed exactly where he was. Daniel used to think wealth was mostly luck or timing or knowing the right person at the right moment. He had convinced himself that people who ended up rich simply started further ahead or caught a break he never got. It was a comfortable story because it meant none of it was really about him. He did not have to change anything if the whole thing came down to circumstances outside his control. Then, almost by accident, Daniel started working part-time for a man named Robert, helping manage a small rental property Robert owned. Robert was not flashy. No watch, no sports car, nothing that screamed money. He drove a 10-year-old truck and wore the same 3 shirts on rotation. Daniel almost did not believe Robert was actually wealthy until he saw the numbers on a property deal firsthand. Over the next year, working close to Robert, Daniel noticed something. Robert never talked about money the way people online did. No hustle quotes, no dramatic mindset speeches, just habits. Small, repeated, almost invisible habits that Daniel slowly started writing down because he realized he was watching something most people never actually get to see up close. The first habit Daniel noticed was how Robert treated small amounts of money. Not big investments, small ones. Robert never wasted anything that could compound. He was not cheap in the way people imagine rich people being cheap, refusing to tip or arguing over pennies. He simply asked one question before almost every purchase. Will this make me money later, or is it gone the moment I spend it? That was it. Groceries gone. The moment spent, fine, necessary. A new gadget he did not need. Gone the moment spent. Skip it. A small stake in a friend's business has a chance to grow, worth considering. Daniel realized most people, including himself, never asked that question at all. Money just left as fast as it arrived, and nobody stopped to sort where it was actually going. Daniel started keeping a small notebook after that first year just for himself, writing down anything he noticed Robert do differently. He never showed it to anyone. It felt strange even admitting he was studying another person's habits like homework, like he was some kind of student instead of a grown adult. But he kept adding to it anyway because everything else he had tried up to that point had not worked. And this at least was something new. The second habit took longer for Daniel to notice because it did not look like a habit, it looked like boredom. Robert read constantly, but not novels, not news, not anything designed to entertain him. He read reports, local property listings, small business filings, industry newsletters nobody else in Daniel's life had ever heard of. One afternoon, Daniel asked him why he bothered. Since none of it was exciting, Robert said something Daniel never forgot. He said, most people are broke because they only know what everyone else knows. Being ahead of anyone means simply knowing something slightly before they do. And the only way to know it first is to actually go looking for it. Instead of waiting for it to show up on a screen already old news, the third habit was harder to accept because it went against almost everything Daniel had been taught. Robert almost never bought anything that lost value the moment he owned it. No new cars, no luxury items bought to look successful. Daniel once asked him directly why he still drove that same old truck when he could clearly afford something better. Robert laughed and said the truck was not the point. The truck ran fine, and the difference between that truck and a brand new one sat quietly in an account instead, growing while everyone who bought the new one was busy explaining to people why they deserved it. Robert was not poor, pretending to be rich. He was rich, choosing not to perform it. The fourth habit was the one that actually changed how Daniel saw his own life. Robert made almost every decision slowly on purpose, especially decisions involving money. He was suspicious of anything that felt urgent, anything pitched to him as a limited time opportunity, act now or miss out forever. He walked away from instantly, no matter how good it sounded. Daniel once watched him turn down a deal that seemed obviously profitable simply because the person offering it was rushing him. Robert told him later that real opportunities do not evaporate in 24 hours. Pressure is a tool people use on those who have not learned to say not yet. The people chasing every urgent opportunity were usually the ones with the least money because urgency is expensive and patience, it turns out, is one of the few things that is actually free. The fifth habit was the quietest one, and honestly the one Daniel almost missed completely because it did not look like a financial habit at all. Robert protected his mornings like they were worth more than anything else. He owned no phone for the first hour of his day. No news, no messages, nothing. He used that hour to think, plan, and occasionally just sit in silence with a cup of coffee doing what looked from the outside like nothing. Daniel asked him once what he was actually doing during that hour. Robert said he was thinking about problems before the day handed him other people's problems to solve instead. He said almost everyone spends their first hour reacting to the world and then wonders why they never seem to get ahead of it. Daniel started copying these 5 habits almost as an experiment, half expecting nothing to change. He began asking that one question before every purchase. He started reading things slightly outside outside his comfort zone instead of scrolling. He stopped buying things that existed only to be looked at by other people. He forced himself to wait deliberately on anything that felt rushed, and he gave himself one silent hour every morning, phone away, before letting the day in. Nothing changed immediately. That is the part nobody wants to hear because it is not exciting to say out loud. For the first few months, Daniel's bank account looked almost exactly the same as before. He nearly gave up more than once, telling himself this was just another thing he had tried and failed at, same as everything else. There was one night about 4 months in when he almost deleted the whole notebook. He had just paid a bill and looked at what was left, and it was barely different from what would have been left a year earlier before any of this started. He sat there wondering if Robert's habits only worked because Robert already had money to begin with, and whether Daniel was just fooling himself trying to copy someone whose starting point had nothing to do with his own. He almost texted Robert that night to ask him honestly if any of it actually mattered. He did not send it. He went to sleep instead. And in the morning, out of pure stubbornness more than belief, he asked the same question before buying his coffee that he had been asking for months. Will this make me money later, or is it gone the moment I spend it? Small, boring, almost pointless in the moment, but he kept doing it anyway. But small decisions repeated enough times eventually stopped being small. Around month 7, Daniel realized he had saved more in that stretch than he had in the previous 2 years combined, without any dramatic sacrifice, without a raise, without anything that looked impressive from the outside. It was not one big decision. It was hundreds of tiny ones quietly compounding while he was not watching closely enough to notice. By the end of that year, Daniel used what he had saved patiently, without rushing, to buy a small stake in a property himself, the exact kind of quiet, boring asset Robert had spent years collecting. Nobody clapped, nobody online cared, there was no dramatic reveal video. It simply became one more habit in a life slowly being rebuilt around habits, instead of moments. Here's what I think is actually worth remembering from all of this. None of these 5 habits require money to start. Not one of them needed Daniel to already be wealthy before he could begin. Asking whether a purchase grows or disappears costs nothing. Reading something slightly harder than usual costs nothing. Refusing to perform wealth you do not have costs nothing. Waiting instead of rushing costs nothing. Protecting one silent hour costs nothing. The only real cost is patience. And patience is exactly the one thing most people are not willing to spend. Rich people rarely talk about these habits, not because they're hiding a secret, but because none of it makes for an interesting story. Nobody wants to hear that the actual answer is repetition, patience, and quietly asking better questions before every decision. It is far more satisfying to imagine some hidden trick nobody else knows about. There isn't one. There's just this done consistently for long enough that other people eventually start calling it luck. If you want to actually build something instead of just watching other people build it, start with one of these 5 habits today, not all 5 at once. Pick the one that feels the most uncomfortable, because that is usually the one that matters most. Do it again tomorrow, and the day after that, I will see you in the next one.